YouTube. And we're live on YouTube and we're here with Antjuan Seawright. Thank you everybody so much for joining us. Welcome to another one of PredictIt's Happy Hour series. Been so grateful and pleased to have so many interesting people join us, and Antjuan, of course, is no different. You're a contributor to The Hill, CBS and BuzzFeed, as well as one heck of a political strategist up and down all these, races, and had some really major impact on what we're dealing with today. So here are the questions, and we'll just get going. I really want to talk to you about South Carolina, just to get a little history. I find this really exciting. So let's just set the stage. It's South Carolina. It's late February. It's what Biden's firewall was supposed to be. And it's your hometown. So the man who got Biden to the Democratic nomination is arguably Jim Clyburn. So talk me through how that all came together and how what you did and the part you played in all that.
Well, if you don't mind, I want to back up a little bit and not take the interstate to get there, but I do want to take the back roads because it's important. Yeah. I said in a political article, and I think it was September of 2017, it was a long article about the presidential race, and I said, the road to heaven and the White House runs through South Carolina, and whomever wins South Carolina will likely go on to be our Democratic nominee. I also said in several other follow-up publications that you cannot be the Democratic nominee without strong, deep, and wide support from the most consequential constituency in the generation, and that's Black voters. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward the tape to when this process started. There's another article in which I said, if and when Joe Biden decides to get into the race, everyone else will be running for second place. And it was no disrespect or slap to any other candidate. It was the mere fact of what we said in South Carolina. We know Joe, and Joe knows us. And everybody was going on this clip about the party's changing, the country's changing, yada, yada, yada. And I just laughed and ignored, and I took some heat. And there were some commentators on the air, on some of the networks, who said I was crazy, said I was out of touch. I'm the establishment. I didn't know what I was talking about. And I laughed because I've seen this before. There was no candidate running for the Democratic nomination that became the nominee without having the majority of African-American support. And that same thing is true when it comes to winning South Carolina. I worked for Hillary Clinton in 2008 and 16. So we lost in South Carolina. In 2008, Barack Obama became the nominee. We won in South Carolina in 2016. Hillary Clinton became the nominee. So I said all those things. Fast forward the tape. We get to South Carolina in February, the CBS debate. That evening, there was a reception in honor of Mr. Clyburn. After that reception, he went into a room, and he's told the story before, so I'm not revealing anything that hadn't been told. He went into a room and met with Joe Biden and told him, or gave him some I would call political strategy, and flat out said to him, when and if you get to a moment in that debate, you simply have to say that one of the things you would do as president is put a Black woman on the Supreme Court. When we go back and examine history, that was the changing point in that political debate, the CBS debate in South Carolina. Fast forward the tape even further, we get to him deciding to endorse Joe Biden. We had planned it out for some days, particularly after that Sunday night. But what he said to me was, I don't want to just endorse Joe Biden. I want to create a surge, because it's not just about South Carolina. It's about carrying the momentum from South Carolina on to Super Tuesday and beyond, so we can wrap this thing up. And so when the world wanted to collapse on Joe Biden and wanted to write his political death certificate after Iowa and New Hampshire, I just laughed and I said, you know what? And beyond, don't worry. South Carolina, the world wanted to collapse on Joe Biden. As a result, right, we are where we are. Now, I hear myself echo, and I hope it's not me. I just laughed and I said, you know what? And beyond, don't worry. South Carolina, the world wanted to.
You know what? Hang on one second.
We are where we are. Now, I hear myself echo, and I hope it's not me. I just laughed and I said, you know what? And beyond, don't worry. South Carolina, the world.
You know what? Hang on one second.
We are where we are. Now, I hear myself echo,
me see this. Let's see if we've got that. Lord have mercy. Sorry about that. So we were talking about South Carolina.
I was talking about, so we get to South Carolina. The world collapsed after Iowa and New Hampshire. They said it was over. They wanted to write its political benediction. The race played out how the DC bubble wanted to. But then I said on CBS News during the Iowa caucuses and in New Hampshire, I said South Carolina will be a place of rehab and relaunch. It will be his political hospital. So fast forward to tape, we get to South Carolina. The debate happened that morning. We set up a press conference and a briefing at Trident Technical College. Jim Clyburn endorses. Just before the endorsement, the day before, we tape a series of TV spots, digital ads, mail pieces were developed, robocalls, and we created a surge going into Super Tuesday. The day after the primary, I hopped in the truck with Mr. Clyburn. We went up to North Carolina. An event that was expected to have 100 people, I think had close to 1,500 people. That's how much the surge we created in South Carolina. So I said to a lot of people, when you count South Carolina out, we always come around and teach you that you do not know how to count.
I think it's one of the more interesting moments of this election. And if you watch it, it was so pivotal and it changed so much. So I geek out a little bit on that backstory.
Well, what Bill Clinton said at John Lewis's funeral, it literally changed the country. And most people believe that when we get to November, it will be the one element of this process that actually saved this country. Because minus Jim Clyburn's intervention, minus African-American voters demonstrating what they always demonstrate, and that's loyalty to the people they believe in, I'm not certain Joe Biden would be the nominee today. And as a result of him not being the nominee, I'm definitely not certain Kamala Harris, a Black woman with Indian descent from Oakland, California, would be his historic running mate.
Well, I want to follow up a little bit on that because, like you said, the African-American vote is so crucial to it. Certainly, this is a very energized part of the electorate. I remember reading about African-American women voters in particular, and you write about this in your op-ed. We've put it in the comment section, guys. So if you see that, go ahead and take a look. It's a really informative op-ed, breaks down demographics, which I know you guys all really enjoy and I get kind of excited about. But this woman, there was a quote for me, and I think it was in the Washington Post, that stood out from a woman who said, Biden isn't my top choice, but he's the best chance of beating Trump. And she was an African-American woman. And it struck me as such a pragmatic stance. And I think does that define the African-American vote? And does anything define it? I suppose is like a bit of a generalization, but it seemed really interesting to me.
Well, let me say a couple of things. One, Black voters are not monolithic, contrary to what the DC bubble thinks. But two, I think we've always been pragmatic and progressive in our approach. Now, pragmatic and progressive may not line up with today's terms, but we've always laid the groundwork for what we believe in. And we've always stood by people who understood our issues, can speak to our issues, and we trust on our issues. I said many, many times on so many occasions, both on TV and in print, that this was a trust election. This was about dependability, durability, and reliability. And Joe Biden has demonstrated all those things throughout his career. And that's no disrespect to anyone who was in the race before. It was just a long line of history, particularly when you got to South Carolina, where 60% of the people who cast their vote were African-American, 55% women. That was the first test case in which the most loyal constituency in this party had a chance to have their say-so. And so while Iowa was cute to flirt with, New Hampshire was cute to blow kisses at, and Nevada was good to wave at, South Carolina is where political candidates go get married in a presidential nominating process. And we've demonstrated that time and time again.
So to that point, Corey Lewandowski, a Trump senior advisor, was on last week. Very excited to have so many great people on. And he said that Trump was going to do well with African Americans. What's your take on that?
Bless his heart, as we say in South Carolina.
Look, I'm from Georgia. I know what that means.
I'll say this about the African American vote. Shame on you if you fool us once. Shame on us if you fool us twice. There's no education in the second kick of the mule. Now, what I will say is that 13% of black men did vote for Donald Trump. Shame on them, because they got everything he showed us he was going to be as a president. But I don't see that happening again, because Donald Trump has a record. He has reputation. He has rhetoric. He has political decisions and policy decisions that people will be able to speak from based on what he has done. And we also know that is not just flirtation, but that is confirmation for the kind of leader he would be for the next 4 years. And so I say to Corey and others who are drunk off the Kool-Aid and making these crazy assumptions about communities they cannot even connect with, I just say to you, like, take a step back for a second and think about what you're saying. The man who told people to go back to where they come from, the man who called, brown voters, Latino voters, rapists and thugs, the man who have said so S-hole countries, all the things that have come along with Donald Trump, not to mention his continuous attacks on Barack Obama, the fact that he attacked Kamala Harris just a few days ago in North Carolina, a black woman, someone who represents, I think, the nerve center of this party. I just think that it is falsely, I think it's malpractice to assume that black voters will be voting for Donald Trump in November, because truth be told, I think we realize now more than ever our network, our net worth, and how high the stakes are in this election for us.
So Corey also suggested that Trump will win in New Hampshire and Michigan and do well in Minnesota. What are your thinking on those states, and what price would you buy or sell at? And if we can pull up the New Hampshire market, if we can get that up. What are you thinking in New Hampshire?
What we're doing well and doing good is two different things. Both of those states have two things in common. One, it's a place where Trump has to win in order to get to his pathway. But two, they're Senate races. And so I think what's going to happen is the bottom is going to drive the top, but the top may have influence on the bottom. And I don't think we can know that. My opinion is that Democrats will have a very handsome night in Michigan. I think we're going to have a fight in Maine, New Hampshire, I'm sorry, but I do think that we will come across the finish line in a very handsome way. I'm confused at Maine and New Hampshire. Sorry about that. There's no Senate race in New Hampshire. But I do think we will do well in New Hampshire, and I do feel really good about Michigan. Keep in mind, Trump won Michigan in 2016. After the 2016 election, we went and had a clean sweep when it comes to statewide in Michigan. We have a governor, a lieutenant governor, and other statewide elected officials. That is a prime example of the tectonic political plates shifting in this country.
Mm. And so let's talk about Minnesota real quick. What are you thinking in Minnesota for the price?
I think that we are going to have to go all in. As they say in my neighborhood, it's going to be all gas, no brake effort in a place like Minnesota. It's a place that I think Democrats can be not just successful, but overly successful. But I think we cannot take it for granted, and we can't make the assumption because Donald Trump is bad in the bubble that he's bad in a place like Minnesota. I mean, we're going to have to really compete there. And I don't see us taking any state or any territory for granted, particularly a place like Minnesota.
Yeah. So we have a question from PredictIt trader, Andrew Miller. He said, I couldn't help but ask about South Carolina 1, given the way Joe Cunningham won Mark Sanford's seat in a conservative Republican district, and with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce endorsement for Cunningham. So what do you see for this contest, and is this a positive development from your perspective to see the U.S. Chamber of Commerce bucking its own tradition to embrace more candidates from both major parties?
Well, that is a pure demonstration that Joe Cunningham puts low country over the party, the thing he said he was going to do when he was running in 2018. And the truth of the matter is you can't find a more bipartisan member of Congress than Joe Cunningham. I do think Joe Cunningham is going to be successful. I think the demographics of that district are changing, but they're not necessarily changing for any other reason other than Joe has demonstrated he belongs and he's willing to do whatever it takes to put his congressional district over DC politics. So many people get caught up in the DC bubble and they go to Washington and forget about back at home. Joe Cunningham has been a steady hand on the switch about issues relating to his congressional district, and I think he will be rewarded for that.
You okay there? Get a little drink. So we had some big books drop this week, the Cohen book and the Woodward book. And they said some pretty damning things about the president. First question, this is a bit wonky, but would you let your boss, whatever principal, sit down with Bob Woodward?
I think that's crazy as hell for Donald Trump in particular to sit down with Bob. We all know Trump. We all know what he has a tendency to do in interviews. I think that it was an act of political malpractice for that to happen, but it happened. And so I would personally, if I were working for Donald Trump, be clear, I never would, but if I were, I would not do that. Sometimes this is about knowing who you work for and knowing what can happen.
Okay. I just really, that wonky side of this stuff I really get into. But so as the president's approval ratings seem to be somewhat immovable, right? Like the lowest they go is about 39%, give or take a point. And the highest they go is relatively, 43, maybe sometimes a little bit higher through this. Our market for who will be president doesn't seem to have budged, and polling is kind of all over the place. So you've got 10-point lead for Biden all the way down to a 2-point lead. What part of the electorate are you looking at right now to judge where there is wiggle room for the president or for Joe Biden?
Well, I think I'm looking at I'm looking at demographics and geographics, right? From a geographical standpoint, the election is always, I think, summarized by 4 or 5 states. I think that may change this election. You got North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona. I think that is where the temperature will essentially rise and make some strong determinations. But I'm also looking at demographics. Donald Trump was successful in 2016 when it came to suburban white women in this country. The one thing we know, based on what has happened in elections post 2016, is that that particular group of voters has decided to come across the street and visit with us. Many of them, I feel, will stay with us based on the policies and the politics of Donald Trump and the Republican Party, but we can't make that assumption because I think we made that assumption in 2016 and we know what we have. I'm also looking at, as I said earlier, African American men. It was a group in which Donald Trump won 13% of the vote. I suspect that because of the efforts I know exist within this party, within the Biden campaign, that number will change and that those folks will come on board with Democrats. But you cannot ignore what this pandemic means to this election and voter suppression. And those are the two things that keep me up at night about how the Republicans' continued effort to suppress votes will impact this election, particularly in some of these places that I just mentioned, but also this pandemic and the vote by mail efforts and the misinformation, disinformation, and the election interference. What is that going to mean? And the ability for people to be able to cast their vote, whether that's in person, whether they have long lines or not, machines in place. There's so many things that go into the election. So some of those things make me worry about how the demographics and the geographics will play out.
There are an incredible number of variables in this election and things that are hard to predict ahead of time. So, makes it
I think that's 100% true. And then the other part about it is that most people like to apply conventional wisdom to this election. We're not living in conventional times, so conventional wisdom goes out of the window. And so what I've said to every Democratic organization, every group, everything I'm involved in, which includes protecting this diverse majority we have, is that we can't do business as usual. We have to conduct unusual business. Traditional high-touch campaigning, showing up at churches and synagogues to worship services, knocking on doors, doing big rallies and events. Those things are out of the window when you're living through 2 pandemics in this country. One is killing Black and brown people disproportionately. We know that is a constituency that Democrats must have in a big way in order to set ourselves up for success. And so you have to throw all those mechanisms and strategies out the window and make adjustments, as we say in yoga, and be intentional about everything we do.
I practice yoga as well.
Namaste.
What sort of adjustments can we look for that the Democratic Party is making going into the final stretch?
Oh, I definitely think taking nothing for granted and not repeating the sins of 2016. I think spending significant time in places where we did not do so in 2016, i.e., those 7 states I just laid out, 5 to 7 states I just laid out, but also really being sober around the notion of elections are won by coalitions and constituencies. And so we have to turn out African American voters collectively. We have to make sure we have a lion's share of Latino voters, Latinx voters. We have to make certain that, again, those suburban white women, we have to remind them what comes along with Donald Trump. And then we have to make certain when we think about rural area, the rural areas of this country, we have to make sure that we show up there and give those voters a reason. Not just Trump is bad. Yes, he's bad, but let's talk about what Democrats are doing. Let's talk about what we're gonna do to improve the overall quality of life for people who have almost given up on the idea that the American experiment can work for them.
Well, so shifting to those demographics, I wanted to chat with you about polling coming out of Florida with Latino voters in favor, a percentage in favor of Trump. What's going on there? Is Florida a do or die state for Trump?
It can be, depending on how the map plays out. Look, I'm not surprised about any numbers that come out of Florida because Florida does what Florida's always going to do. That's make us sweat, make us worry, and cause us to damn near go crazy politically. What I am not overly concerned about is the Latino polling that you mentioned, because a sample size of 100 people in a state where you may have several million, maybe even 6 million Latino voters doesn't make me pause on a trip to the bathroom. Here's what Democrats cannot do. We cannot make the assumption that because Donald Trump is bad, because of his rhetoric, that those voters are going to show up for us. And that's why we have to put all our efforts and energy into specific constituency organizing to make sure that we remind people about Donald Trump, but remind people also about how our policies will not just change their today, but change their tomorrow. We have to do that with African American voters, Latino voters, and then the last thing, we have to be clear that Latino voters in Florida may have different priorities than Latino voters in Texas. And so you can't make the assumption what's good for one is good for all.
Well, and to your point about sample sizes in this most recent poll, there was also a poll that cited African Americans. I think I saw it in the Washington Times, and the sample size was 323 people. Do you think minority groups are being sampled in sample sizes that are too small to be represented?
100%. And you have to make the safe assumption, and I'm saying this as a Black man, is that when it comes to polling, I've never been polled in my life, nor has my mother. And so when people speak to some of these polls when it comes to Black voters, I always ask the question, who the hell they calling and where they get the information from? Because most people I know have never been polled. And so you make the safe assumption that's not a real snapshot of the entire community. But also you have to remember, sometimes we don't always respond in the way that people think when it comes to polls. What I do know is I would say 95% of us who show up are going to vote Democratic. That's been proven time and time again. And thank God for Black women, because they make that number work that I just recited to you. They have been the political glue that has held this party together. And I think they have been the resource that have held this country together in so many occasions. Because think about if Black women did not show up for Doug Jones in 2017, what would have happened? Imagine if Black women did not show up for Barack Obama in 2008 and 12. Think about the midterms when we had very handsome turnout from Black women. So all I'm saying is when it comes to sampling sizing of African-American voters, I don't get so caught up in the snapshot of the moment, because that's what a poll is. What I pay attention to is the enthusiasm factor. And you can't go a place and talk to an African-American voter or an African-American family who are not just bothered, but pissed off about the idea of how Donald Trump has conducted himself as president.
Well, and to your point, the midterm elections, I think, showed you talk about Doug Jones, but even down in Louisiana, different races down there, certainly Black women were that glue that you talk about. So I love talking about down ballot races because I'm a nerd. But in this race in particular, I'm trying to figure out if down ballot voters are going to be willing to split tickets Could Mark Kelly win in Arizona and have the president win the state too, as Corey Lewandowski suggested last week? And if that's the case, what is your best guess for what's going on with this phenomenon?
Well, the answer to your question is absolutely. Down ballot races and tickets will be split. The truth of the matter is, I think people have realized the closer your government is to you, the more important it is for you. And when you think about down ballot races, you may think about federal races. When I think about down ballot, I think about going way down the ballot to state legislative races, governor's races, city council, and county council, because those things probably have perhaps more gravity than even some of the races at the federal level. When things do not get done in Washington, D.C., which I sometimes call dysfunctional city, people depend on their local government. And when elected officials can't get it right at the highest level, the executive branch, people depend on those races on down the ballot. That's why I believe Mark Kelly will win in Arizona. That's why you see so much momentum with Jamie Harrison in South Carolina. That's why I believe you see the numbers in North Carolina with Cal Cunningham, and they may not match up to the numbers with Biden and Trump in North Carolina. In 2008, I think you're old enough to remember, Kay Hagan won the state, so did Barack Obama. In 2012, the governor lost the race. We lost the governorship there. In 2016 in North Carolina, guess what happened? Roy Cooper won the governor's race, and we had a number of statewide races in North Carolina that came on the Democratic side, but Trump won the state. I think you'll see a lot of that going into the 2020 election.
Well, and to that point, this brings us to our lightning round, which I know everybody gets excited about.
I'm all about lightning.
We should get some sound effects, but we're not that high tech. We're going to bring in PredictIt CEO John Phillips. Are you there? Hey, John.
I'm here. Yeah. Hey.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi there.
So I'm going to turn it on over to you. You have some fun.
All right, great. First, Antjuan, I've been fascinated by what you've been talking about, but my eyes keep getting drawn to a black and white photo that's off your left shoulder. What is that photo of?
I have to tell you about that photo. It's so personal to me. So you may not know this, John, but blacks could not vote in the all-white Democratic primary before George Elmore, who's in that picture, a man in South Carolina, in Columbia, sued. Elmore is the Elmore, it's the Elmore case. Supreme Court is a court case in which he sued so the African Americans can participate in the Democratic primary. Well, fast forward to tape, he won. That was one of the first times after that lawsuit in which black voters can participate in the Democratic primary. If it wasn't for Elmore versus Rice in that lawsuit, then guess what? Barack Obama would never be president. Kamala Harris would never have been a nominee for vice president because African Americans would not be able to participate in the Democratic primary. That picture is so special to me. There's a lady in that picture.
Can you put it closer to the camera? Can you hold it up to the camera?
Yeah, I will. There's a lady in that picture holding an umbrella. Her name is Miss Donnella Wilson. She lived to be 109 years old. She raised 3 generations of my family on the Langside Plantation down in Fort Mont, South Carolina. She voted in every election since 1947. We voted together every single election starting in 2008. So that means twice she voted for an African-American president. 3 times she voted for Columbia, South Carolina's first black mayor. And the last time we voted together, we voted for Hillary Clinton, the first woman to be a major party's nominee for president. So she saw history. And she would always tell me there was a day in which we had to count how many marbles were in a jar, how many bubbles you can get out of a piece of bubble gum, pronounce misspelled words on a piece of paper, recite the Constitution, if asked if we're a member of the NAACP, and sometimes that would be the reason people are denied the vote. And she was able to see, I think, what the promise looks like by being able to participate. And so this photo, George Elmore, Donnella Wilson, and others, is one of the first times that African Americans were able to participate in the Democratic primary. Elmore versus Rice is an interesting court case. Wow. Let me tell you about George Elmore, because you may not know this. After that lawsuit, he won. He owned a taxi cab, 2 liquor stores, a 5 and dime store, and a number of things. After that court case, he lost everything he got. Ended up dying. His wife ended up going to a mental institution and eventually passing away. And so when I think about the right to vote and participating in this little democracy, I think about people in that picture. and the sacrifices they made so that we can just have the right to participate.
Well, I'm sure she'd be very, very proud of you. So that's terrific. What a great story. Thank you for sharing that. All right, we're going to get to PredictIt odds now. This is for these predictors out there who are interested in, frankly, making a little money by betting on winners. And I want to go back to 4 states: North Carolina, Arizona, Michigan, and Montana. So North Carolina first. It looks like a toss-up in terms of who's going to win for the presidential election. What at 50-50, is that the right odds right now in your opinion, or should
100%. The tricky part about North Carolina is you have a Senate race that's very hotly contested, in which both parties are making real investments, and you have all the statewide offices are up. And so what could happen in theory is that Trump could win the state, possibly. Roy Cooper could go back as the governor, and all the statewide races could fall Democratic, and Cal could win the Senate race. And I think that's the tricky part about North Carolina. I know this sounds so cliche and sounds so simple, but it's all going to be about turnout in the rural parts of North Carolina. You can safely make the assumption that the urban and suburban parts of North Carolina are going to swing Democratic just by the trends in the state. But the rural parts of that state are going to be critical. And the suburban white women are going to have a big say-so in what happens in North Carolina.
So to that point, it's on the Senate race, the predicted traders have it at 67% odds that the Democrats will win the Senate race. Are those odds too high?
I think they're very high. I would put it probably at 55%.
Right. Okay. So you're a seller at 67 and a buyer at 55, I guess is the way to put it.
100%.
Okay. Arizona. I know you talked about this. The predicted traders have that at 63% odds that the Democrats win it at the presidential level. Is that high, low, or just about right?
It's close. I would probably put it more at the 57. And I'm kind of conservative with my thinking. I feel very handsome about the Senate race. I would probably take that number and apply that to the Senate race for sure. When it comes to the presidency, I would probably be a little more conservative. I would probably be on the 57, 58%.
So it probably won't come as a surprise that on the Senate, the predicted traders have the Democrat to win at 86 cents, which seems awfully high. But
no, I wouldn't go that far, but I definitely would be in the 63, between 63 and 70% range when it comes to the Senate race. We have an incredible candidate who's running a hell of a campaign, and they have a terrible candidate who cannot even stand close to the record.
Right. Okay. Back to Michigan. I warned you. So the predicted traders have the Dems to take Michigan in the general election for the president at 71% odds. High, low, or just about right?
It's kind of high. I would probably put it at 60%. And again, I'm conservative to all of you who are probably mad at me, but I'm on the conservative side. I believe in the old Southern carpenter's theory, measure twice and cut once. And with the Senate race in Michigan going on, I think that's going to have some impact on what turnout looks like. And so I would probably be more on the conservative side. I do think the momentum from 2018 can spill over to have tremendous impact on 2020. But I'm probably not as fluid as some of those odds you just laid out.
Right. Yep. Okay, good. So Montana is the last one. Republican to win Montana, 87 cents or 87% is the way PredictIt works. Is it 87% odds that Republicans going to win the presidential election in Montana?
I would probably put it at around 75, but I do think I would put the Senate race probably more at 60 that we'll win. Bullock is a very credible candidate. You have a governor's race out there. I think that Montana voters, while I've never been there, I've studied their politics a little bit. I think it's all about familiarity and trust, and I think they demonstrated that with their election, their continued election of Bullock as governor. So I think that helps them.
Right. Yeah, I think that's where the odds are right now, right around there. It's 63 cents. 63 cents for the Senate race that the Republicans win the Senate race. So that sounds about right. Okay, listen, thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Back to you, Allison.
Oh, thank you, John, for doing that. We always like to bring John in on that. It's a little better at it than
my favorite thing to do. All right.
Now, be clear. I don't want people losing their net worth or their retirement fund because of me.
Okay, that means nobody's going to retire early because of you either. So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
It's a collective wisdom of everything that we point to, and that's, I think, how people look at this. So we have a question from Colin Bartol. Forgive me if I butchered your name. The large amount of money being spent on this race on battleground states, will it lead to expanding the map in unexpected ways? I think the Montana Senate race is going to be astounding amount of money. So
yes, the map will be expanded, and what you're going to see is places that people never thought that Democrats would compete, not just at the top of the ticket, but on down the ticket. I think you're going to see that play out in a real way in this election cycle in particular. It was, I think we started to see a peak at that in the 2018 elections. Think about the districts that Trump won. I think it was 20 of them that he won in 16, that we won in 18. So I think that 20 will be a continuance of what we saw in 18 in terms of them expanding our map and our footprint and bringing together a new coalition of what Democratic voters look like.
And then I've got one final question. We talked a little bit about the races tightening. Do you think that the Atlantic article on the military has created some backlash, or are Trump loyalists so strong that nothing really moves the needle and it's sort of that middle ground?
I think it was a sting, but I'm not sure it's a bite. And there's a big difference in politics. I do think that it is going to give some people the confidence they need, or their sign they were looking for to vote against Trump. But I also think it's going to make hardcore Trump supporters who can give two flying kites about any article about Donald Trump. It's going to energize them and make them come out even more and make them, I think, calcify around Donald Trump even more. And so that stuff always cuts both ways. And that's why I remind people, you can't get caught up on some of the conversations or things that happen in the bubble. You really have to stay focused on what's in the hearts and minds of people. And for people who are worried about this pandemic, for black and brown mothers who are worried about whether their son or daughter is going to come home if they happen to get stopped by the police, for people who have lost their job and on unemployment, all those things, they could give two flying kites about an Atlantic article, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, Antjuan, Seawright, thank you so much. It's just a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your personal stories and your wisdom. We really, enjoyed having you on, and hopefully we'll be able to duplicate this before the end of the election.
I can't wait to come back.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you, everyone.